Hi, welcome to Lean Whiskey. It's episode 47. I'm Mark Graban, joined as usual by
Jamie Flinchbaugh, 47. We might catch up with our age one of these days.
If we do, I'm turning 51 in October. We probably won't get to episode 51 by then, so we keep chasing.
Maybe not, but
ahead.
I'm ahead of you, so we'll see.
That would be something to celebrate when we hit my intersection of episode number and age.
There we go. So nice shirt. I like I know the listeners can't see, but New Riff Distilling, favorite of mine now.
My most local distillery here in Newport, Kentucky. Well, I think they're in, they list Newport. So
yeah.
Cheers
great
to New Riff.
Great stuff. I recently ended up, I was at a restaurant that does barrel picks, and I needed to round out my tab, so I got a couple bottles of their barrel pick New Riff in the closet. Haven't been opened yet, but I may have to open both bottles at the same time and do a comparison because they're two different barrel picks. Yeah, but I do like their stuff.
Yeah, I do too. I am not getting to it yet. We'll get there soon. I'm not drinking New Riff tonight, but I've got a barrel pick from someone else that's here in Kentucky, and there's a story there related to mistakes. So I'm going to plug my favorite mistake there. We're going to do the same with our other podcast here. Jamie hosts a podcast called People Solve Problems, similar to his book.
Yeah, named right after my book. It felt like, why overthink it? So it's just, let's just call it the same thing. I mean, I had other titles for the podcast. I'm like, let's just call it the same thing as the book and call it a day. So always enjoying that. I'm speaking with I'm recording an episode tomorrow with an author, actually with the author of Both and Thinking, which is
Wendy K. Smith.
Yep.
So interviewed her on the Lean blog interviews.
Awesome. My podcast, not nearly as well established as your podcast. So,
and there is Wendy's book, by the way, for those watching on YouTube.
Yes, Both and Thinking, great for problem solving for those that don't know, and you can hear more about that presumably when I record our episode.
Yeah. So do you have a problem that you've solved recently?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. Sometimes you end up having to resolve the same problem, and sometimes you go back to the same solution. Sometimes it's, well, this didn't work. Let's create a new solution. I end up doing, for a lot of the clients I have that are under my Act with Purpose program or product, I guess. We start emailing about scheduling a standing schedule, and we have some standing work, but because it's sort of the beginning of a nascent conversation, it's hard to know how it starts, and so it's really hard to have precise standard work. And so I'll loop in one of my team members on the CC list. But it's kind of one of these where, you're in the conversation, but there's no trigger to drive action. And our standard is everything's on Trello. We have a Trello board that establishes all the work. All the work is on Trello. And so, sometimes I'll leave somebody on CC and just hope for the best is probably the best description of the strategy. And so I've returned to, even when you're having a conversation on email, and you create the Trello card, because that's where all work doesn't exist unless it's on the Trello board, and it doesn't take much. It has to say, here's the task per email thread. That's all it has to say. But it's if that's the standard, then don't use it some of the time. Use it all the time, and so that's a return to a solution, but a problem I find myself falling back into every once in a while, and just need to remind myself of the solution.
Yeah, If the countermeasure goes away, the problem returns.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what about you? Problem you solved?
Well, it was more of a mistake I made. I'll keep it on the theme of it. It's not a favorite mistake. It's a recent mistake. So, we're recording this in a web-based platform called StreamYard, and I've been using it for a while. And, we're not live streaming now, but you can do that. You can record, and the quality of the output's a little bit better than Zoom. But I made this mistake I had only made once before, but I'll call it progress of how it turned out. I didn't forget to hit record, but I failed to do it properly because Streamline, for some reason, requires 2 clicks, which I'm going to give them some feedback on the interface. I don't think you need a second. Just start recording when you click record. And if you click record too soon, you can stop and restart. Mm-hmm. So I clicked it once, and I think I misclicked on the second click, and I jumped right into the introduction with Hugh Alley. And I noticed about 5 minutes in that the red recording and the timer was not going in the upper left corner. And part of why I didn't realize that is that I tend to drag some other window over my face because I don't want to be watching and looking at myself talk. And I'm looking ahead at the guest, and I had pulled that window up too far. And then I moved that window, not to peek at my hair or something, but I had reason to move that window. And then I looked at, I wasn't checking, did my hair look okay? But then I saw that red, what?
I know I'm never checking if my hair is okay.
It's easy. And then I saw the red, and I saw it was missing. So I called timeout, and I'm like, Hugh, I did not properly hit record. But compared to the one time I did that using, I think, Skype technology 14 years ago, I'll call it, at least I caught it 5 minutes in. I fessed up to it. Hugh couldn't have been nicer about it. He's like, "Oh, okay. Well, okay. Well, we'll go and we'll start again." So I didn't feel as bad about the time when I had to fess up and say to that guest, and I still can't remember who it was. Shame on me. I messed up. I didn't blame technical problems. The problem was me. So that's the type of thing when we talk about problem solving, like when we talk about different solutions or countermeasures or mistake proofing. Mm-hmm. I mean, is that something you've run across at all in your podcast stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, interesting. Zoom requires 2 clicks too, because it's click to record and then record on computer or record on cloud. So it's 2 clicks. Mm-hmm. And then what I've noticed is that because we use Otter AI as a transcript plugin, because Otter's there, it tells you that it's recording as soon as the meeting starts. Mm-hmm. And so there's not this, it used to be you hit record and there's this prompt, this meeting is being recorded. So It's very, very obvious. But now that prompt is at the beginning of the meeting. And so I've noticed the clarity of knowing if I'm recording has gone down as a result of this plugin.
So you're saying there's less of a visual indicator?
Less of a visual. I do know where to look to kind of go, yep, that's recording. And it doesn't mean the transcript. It means I'm recording. But I kind of have to make sure I go look because it's just not as obvious. And I've been on the receiving end of that. I recorded an episode of somebody else's podcast recently-ish. And they forgot to hit record. And I found out about a week or 2 later. And I've been too busy. We haven't re-recorded. I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure if we will.
Right.
At this point, we'll see. And it's a shame. I actually thought it was a pretty good episode of what we were talking about. But yeah, it was. There's no way to hide around. It's like, oh, the file was corrupt. We forgot to hit record, and like I said, mistakes happen, and it's we can be disappointed in the outcome, but that's different than being disappointed in the intent, right? Which is, I'm disappointed this happened. Doesn't mean we have to be mad at the person who made the mistake.
Right. And, when I was the one who forgot to record 14 years ago, I should remember who it was because they were so gracious. And their response was something like, well, okay, we'll call that a practice session. We'll do it again. It'll be better. And then when that, I think, occurred to me maybe a year ago, because it was through Zoom, and I didn't notice until at the end where you would get some notification that the recording has stopped or something. I'm like, wait, was this recording? Because it didn't show the indicator in Zoom. And the guy said, oh, we've got this other system it runs through. That's how we do the recording. But then he followed up a couple days later and said there was a technical problem. So I don't know if that other system also somehow wasn't running, but I figured I needed to pay it back and say, oh, hey, no worries. We'll do it again, and I'll try to be a better guest. Yeah, okay.
It would be pretty funny if I was that original guest.
I think you would have remembered. I think, or I would.
But
I mean, it wasn't somebody who was a regular, frequent guest, but yeah. I mean, there's ways of trying to mistake proof it. Like Zoom meetings have settings where webinars the same way. You can set it to automatically start the Zoom recording when you start, but then you've got to remember to go edit out.
Yeah.
Pre-chat, and that's a little extra work. And
we don't, I mean, we still always have to do some editing. It's more about finding the point in time. But because I'm recording 20-minute episodes. People Solve Problems is a shorter podcast than what you do and what we're doing here. And so a lot of times I'm catching, if it's somebody I know, we're catching up, and we'll sometimes have a 20-minute conversation before we even start the podcast. Yeah, it's a lot of recording time to go find the clean point and edit it out. There's ways around that. I know even in the transcript, I used to go 3, 2, 1, just so we could find 3, 2, 1 in the transcript and know where it was. And now that's easier anyway. But nevertheless, I may just out of fear now, I may start doing that.
Yeah. One other little mistake I made right at the beginning of a podcast, and I didn't repeat it at all during the episode. So I was recording an episode of My Favorite Mistake with a guy, Doug Brown. And only when I very first welcomed to the show, I said, we're joined today by George Brown. Now, I knew his name was Doug. I'd talked to him. I had notes in front of me. And I think my brain played a trick on me where like one of the health system CEOs at a place that I'd gone to was George Brown. And so that name has been spoken by me. And I guess, my mouth was on autopilot. And I said, well, our guest today is George Brown. And I didn't notice the mistake until I was doing the editing of the beginning of the episode. But then I also didn't notice that he was sort of trying to, I know he's not a lean guy, but pull the andon cord. He wasn't waving his hands, but I was reading the intro off the notes, and then when I looked at the recording, his eyes got big, and he was like, "No." And I'm like, if he had said something, if he had said, "Hey, time out," you said George, and oh God, I'm sorry, I would have gone back and re-recorded it, but I got it right the whole rest of the episode.
Right.
So something about just that very first time, my mistake.
Well, these kind of mistakes lead to need to pour a drink, right?
I like to say I want to pour a drink more than I need to.
That's probably better, but so let's pour a drink.
Yes, I've already done that. You've got something to open.
Yeah. So our theme today is new whiskeys to us. So we're having new whiskeys for the first time. And so I'm literally, we'll see if the mic picks this up. I'm cracking.
Yeah, I hear that screw cap.
The screw cap. So I don't know. I mean, screw caps scientifically are perfectly good, but might say something
there's
about
nice whiskeys and increasingly good wines and
increasingly good
cap
wine
tops. Yeah.
But I'm literally cracking a bottle open. So my new to me is called Four Walls, and it's an Irish American whiskey. Now it's a celebrity whiskey, which I guess I hate the idea of. I hate the idea of paying extra just because someone's name is on it, and that's usually what most celebrity whiskey is.
Yeah.
And this celebrity whiskey is from a trio of members of the cast of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which, as a soccer guy, Rob McElhenney is co-owner of Wrexham. For those that follow at least the story, even if they don't follow football.
That's me. I've heard of this show and the story, and they're
And so they're through 2 promotions already, which is fantastic. But so besides that tie-in, I mean, it was $32. So like that's kind of the sweet spot of like, if nothing else, it's probably a good mixer. But it also is unique in the sense that it's American rye blended with Irish whiskey, and blended in Ireland, not in America. So I don't know the actual mash bill. I doubt they share it.
Right.
And
so they ship the rye over there and blend it and bottle and ship some here.
Right. So it's unique. I've never had that. I mean, one of the commercials is almost like a Reese's, peanut butter cup. So you've got your American rye and my smooth Irish whiskey. So first sip.
Hopefully it's the best of both worlds.
It's I'll say first sip without a lot of nuance. Not bad.
All right. Not bad.
Not bad.
You didn't spit it out.
I didn't spit it out. It's not a drain pour. It's probably not an evening sipper. I think it is probably a mixer. Little soft on the front end.
That's the Irish.
Yeah. Little heavy alcohol on the nose, and it's only 80 proof, which is, interesting. So
is there an age statement? It's probably young.
It's probably young. It just says made with a blend of Irish whiskeys and American rye whiskey. So, hard to say. So, great. No, on the rocks, when it's hot outside and you just want something to almost mindlessly drink, with some ice on it.
Yeah.
Probably perfectly good. Probably perfectly good in a mixer. I'm probably not pouring this into a special glass to sip on and enjoy. But that's the way we try stuff, right?
Yeah.
So,
did you get some of that rye spice on the end of it then?
You get a little bit. On the back end, the back of the palate, you get a little bit of the spice. It doesn't last long. It doesn't have that long, stretchy feel. But it comes in. It does come in. You do get a little bit of that spice. Unique. I give them credit for that. This is a different flavor profile. I'd be curious about, if they did a $80 version of the same idea, what could they do with that? 4 Walls Premium or something like that.
Yeah.
I doubt it's happening, but yeah, I'm not disappointed. I bought it and opened it. But I probably wouldn't be recommending it all over the place either.
So to summarize, not bad. It is what it is.
Not bad. It is what it is. Worth a try.
Yeah.
For $32.
You would feel bad if you had spent $80 on that, though.
I would feel bad if I spent $80, but like I said, spend $32, and $32 is worth the experiment all by itself. So
yeah. Oh, cool. So I today opened up. I've had other whiskeys from this distillery. So the distillery is Jeptha Creed. They're east of Louisville. They're right off of I-64, which runs between Louisville and Lexington. Relatively new distillery. The CEO, I'll give a little bit of the backstory. The CEO and master distiller, Joyce Nethry, was a guest on My Favorite Mistake recently. And I'll talk about the whiskey and why I thought she was going to be great for My Favorite Mistake. So they're one of a very small number of woman-owned distilleries. she's the master distiller, which is pretty unusual, but to be woman owned as well. It's her and her daughter, and there's some other family involved. So Jeptha Creed is the name of the distillery. When they do a single barrel pick at the distillery, which I was able to go visit a couple of weekends ago, they use different packaging and they call it Bloody Butcher's Creed. And so the Bloody Butcher name, part of what makes Jeptha Creed kind of unusual is that they use a red corn. It's an heirloom varietal called Bloody Butcher corn because it doesn't grow red. It grows whitish yellow, but it has red speckles, and then it becomes red. And it does really look like a blood red color. So Joyce and I, because of her expertise, geeked out on corn more than I ever expected to do in an episode. So if you're into that kind of thing, check out her episode of My Favorite Mistake. But they use, so what I'm drinking here, they do a lot of 4-grain. So they use that red corn, a little bit of malted barley. They use malted rye, which is kind of unusual. And then I thought even more unusual, they use malted wheat.
Yep.
And the reason that they use all of the malted wheat and the malted rye was basically because of a delivery mistake when they were doing some test batch runs. And they used it and they liked it, and it's a differentiator.
Right.
So it's unusual, and it's got like kind of a not in a bad way funky, but almost kind of earthy. Like there's definitely some different kind of flavor profiles there.
Yeah, I don't imagine with that much malting going on, that's not unusual. And of course, as you said, the corn's different. And both rye and corn, when it came to bourbon and rye, was just very generic, right? It's just blended batches. And so there's an increase of from farm to still.
Well, so they grow all of their grains, and so they call it ground to glass.
Yeah.
So that's another differentiator.
Absolutely, which is very hard to scale, right? You can't become Jim Beam that way, but but again, you're a brand new distillery trying to make your way in the universe. It's nice to have just distinguishing features like growing your own grains, like using red corn. So
Joyce's husband comes from, I think he's 3rd generation with a lot of farmland. So they're farmers who decided to get into the distilling game, which is how distilling even started in Pennsylvania and other states. Were like, oh, these crops are going to go bad, so let's distill it.
Right. I mean, they still liked it, right? So it wasn't like there wasn't a market for whiskey, but it was a use. It was one of the best place to store value of too much grain. Was in how do you store it, in a silo or in whiskey? And so you stored value of grain in whiskey. And so, Pennsylvania was stronger with rye, and that's, and they did bourbon too. It wasn't called bourbon then, but it was just whiskey. But, stronger rye in the Pennsylvania days. And then as things moved west, it was just what's the crop we grow? Well, we grow corn. So that's the crop we use to make bourbon with. It wasn't some grand invention. It was just that's the crop that's available to us.
Yeah. So I mean, I've enjoyed what they're doing. They've got some different mash bills, with or without the wheat. Again, this is a 4-grain. It's aged a little more than 5 years. It's 125 proof, and it doesn't taste that high of alcohol. It's old enough to not be real hot, and even by looking at it, I think even though it's still a clear distillate, Joyce thinks some of the compounds in the red corn take to the barrel aging a little better to make it darker than its age, and it tastes a little older. The only thing I'm curious, I wish I had asked about when we were there. It says bourbon whiskey. Now, it seemed like it would qualify as straight bourbon whiskey, even with the addition of the 4th grain. So it makes me wonder, is that just a marketing thing for the label, or are they not following one of the rules and requirements? Like, I don't think they're using a older barrel. Like I got a bottle of a product from Jim Beam recently called Hardin's Creek, and they were touting, hey, we used secondary barrels, and so they have to legally call it corn whiskey.
Right. Yep.
So maybe there's a lot on the label anyway. They didn't want to fit in that word. I don't know.
Yeah. No, and I'm always intrigued by four grains. They're complex and interesting. You get to kind of see how are these grains coming together. I've never found a four grain that I love. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting. Like I love to buy them, and I do enjoy tasting them, but I've never found a four grain where I'm like, this is the four grain. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, four grains feel like they're trying too hard, but
yeah, I mean, it should add more complexity or layers to it. Then there's the variable of the malting. Like to me, a malted rye, New Riff does a lot of malted rye. There's a certain flavor characteristic there compared to regular unmalted rye.
Right. So, if four grain on the shelf will catch my attention. I'm like, there's another four grain. I have a bottle of Penelope four grain, which is one of MGD's brands, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly.
MVP, yeah.
MGD,
that's like old beer.
Yeah,
term, Miller Genuine Draft.
and it's a low proof four grain, so it's always not that it's all in the proof, but when you're proofing something down, you're taking some of the flavor out, which is why barrel proof is so popular.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, cheers to the people at Four Walls and to Joyce and her great team at Jeptha Creed. Cheers to them.
Yep, and cheers to trying new whiskeys, because that's the journey.
Yep. So, all right. So we're going to do things a little differently today in our In the News segment. Instead of taking a deep dive into one news item, we're going to do a relatively quick rundown of four different items that were in the news. One of the sources, I don't know if we'd call news. I'll come back to that. I think our third topic, but we're not going to set a timer, but this is going to be a little bit more like lean whiskey, or no, I'm sorry. That's why we named the show Lean Whiskey, like lean coffee, where, you go through and have short discussions. We're not going to do the timer and the voting if we're going to move on.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like lean coffee. So if those want to learn about lean coffee, there's a process for it. It's a great way to facilitate a discussion around a bunch of topics with a group. I've used it. I've been a part of it. But there's very clear rules, and it's meant to be quick and fast and precise and all of that. And this is whiskey, so we're going to be a little less rigid on the rules.
I propose doing the timer, and Jamie's like, all right, let's be a little more laid back about it. Like, all right.
I've been on a clock all day, so let's.
All right. Did you ever watch, and Saturday Night Live mocked it, the McLaughlin group?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I watched a clip of that recently. I was about to go, issue one.
Issue one.
John McLaughlin just always yelled. And
it is, the SNL skit around that is pretty funny.
Yeah.
So I do remember
Jamie J. Flinchbaugh. He would have some nickname for you, but
for everybody, every time.
Yeah. All right. The late John McLaughlin. I think he passed not too long ago.
I mean, I don't remember, but if he hasn't, kudos to him.
He was up there. So, all right. So topic number one, this was in the news. There's a link we've got from AORN, American. It's operating room nurses organization, I think. But anyway, a news article about the state of Kentucky being the first state in the U.S. to decriminalize medical errors. And people might be wondering, well, why was it ever criminalized to begin with? This law undoubtedly came in the aftermath of the Redonda Vaught case and the controversy that state down south, Tennessee. So this Kentucky law that was signed by the governor says, in part, a healthcare provider providing health services shall be immune from criminal liability for any harm or damages alleged to arise from an act or omission relating to the provision of health services. and people can go read more about that online. I mean, what's your reaction to that, Jamie? As a lean guy, patient?
Yeah. So fundamentally, in healthcare, and let's narrow it down to, not that this is where it applies, but let's just narrow it down to emergency room, doctors, EMS, emergency room nurses, right, where things are urgent by definition, right? And so medicine's uncertain, treatment's uncertain, conditions are uncertain, and speed of decision making is paramount, right? And so if you basically put somebody in a position where if they fail to act and save somebody's life, it's okay because they were going to die anyway. But if you act and make a mistake, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
Well, we know, I mean, it's a very clear incentive. So what you would have is every emergency room nurse, just again, focus on that as a category, would say, well, I know what I should do is to shock them. I know what I should do is to give them this med, or I should start this IV or whatever it is. But I'm going to not do anything until a doctor tells me to do it. Who would also be criminally liable, by the way. But I'm not going to, well, I don't make as much as a nurse, and I'm not going to jail just because I did my job.
Well, and I think things that are a matter of decisions may fall under malpractice law, but I think there's a lot of process and system errors. And so, in the Redonda Vaught case, she administered the wrong medication to a patient. But there were technology issues with the medication cabinets that are supposed to provide mistake proofing. And she was thrown into an unfamiliar unit. And arguably, I would say there wasn't good supervision. She didn't have an andon cord to pull if she was uncertain. All these different factors where I would say it's incredibly unfair and unjust to punish somebody for a mistake. Now, I'm sure this is a very rare situation where you have, a quote unquote angel of death who's intentionally killing people. That's not, that's intentional.
Yeah.
It's not it's not the kind of mistake that they're looking to decriminalize here. And, I think criminalizing mistakes drives reporting down. If like Redonda Vaught could have conspired with her manager to cover up what had happened, and it's people are going to get better at covering up and hiding near misses, right? And then harms are more likely to occur. And that's just, criminalization. It doesn't really solve anything. It may provide some sense of vengeance more than justice.
There's a reason. I remember this from a TV show, but there's a reason you don't put families in charge of deciding the fate of those they find guilty. And because vengeance is a very real and even legitimate emotion, but we can't have a legal system based on that. And, process design is one thing, but, we also have the environmental conditions around that process working. So if you have, I don't know if you've ever been in an emergency room when there was a surge, but it's just, they don't have the capacity. And so everybody's running around doing the best they can, trying to prioritize, and stuff happens, right? There's no way, because it's not predictable situations. It's not stuff you can plan for. You can only plan for how you do your best.
Yeah.
And so not only we'll chase out the right people, nobody will join the profession.
Right.
Everybody will be hamstrung from acting, and I won't want to administer a medicine until 5 people signed off on it. So I think it's fundamental. These are people trying to do their job, and if they're trying to do their job, which is to care, mistakes shouldn't be criminal. Yeah. In their field of practice and in what it's designed to be. And there's plenty of places where mistakes are criminal, but in those cases, decisions preceded them, right? Like negligent homicide because you were drunk
Right.
Oh, that's the decision that preceded it. When you hop behind the wheel of a car or something like that. So
Right.
this is somebody trying to do their job and help people. So I think it's fantastic. It should be a nationalized law. My hope is that people follow fast. It's interesting what's going on in Kentucky because they're from a legal standpoint, it's just been an interesting state to watch. Let's just say that. So,
Yeah.
So kudos to them. I hope they set an example for others to follow. My fear is that every state needs to see it hit close to home before they do act, which is why maybe we need a national law.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so we're moving along. We'll go topic number 2.
Topic number 2. So, this is one that's not really in the news, but it was in Forbes, so we'll count that. But I wrote a piece about Hanlon's razor, and why every employee should be required to read it or understand it. So I was reading a book about different logic methods and tools and things like that, and that's where I was kind of reading about Hanlon's razor and Hanlon's razor. So let's start here. A razor, in the construct of decision making, et cetera, is meant to shave down, right, just like razors do, shave down assumptions to make decision making easier, right? Because the world's complex, right? So most people have heard of Occam's razor as an example. Right? The simplest answer is most likely to be true. Hanlon's razor is meant to accomplish the same thing, get us to a decision faster. So that's a razor.
Yeah.
So Hanlon's
I didn't
razor,
know why it was called that, so I've learned something.
No, and I had heard this once before, but it didn't stick. And so when I was reading about it, I did more research and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is literally to shave assumptions.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's just, of course, that makes so much sense once I reread that. So Hanlon's razor is basically never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. And stupidity is a strong word, which we can unpack.
I was glad you got into that in the article.
I did try to unpack it because it's like, oh, what do I want to be, mean or stupid? And I know a lot of people would rather be mean than stupid. So on its surface,
some accomplish both.
Some accomplish both. That's true. So I think a great example of this, literally happened to me this morning. I dropped my wife off at the Newark airport, my wife and daughter off at the Newark airport, was driving home. So I'm on I-78, a horrible highway in New Jersey, not a great state to drive. And so, somebody pulls out in front of you. It's like somebody had pulled out in front of me like the third time. I'm like, what a jerk, right? That's what you tell yourself. What a jerk, right? Why would they do this to me? How important do they think they are? But, how many people do you know who do that on purpose? And if none of us know that many people, we probably know somebody, right? But if most of the people that we know wouldn't do that on purpose, do we not have enough friends, or is it not very likely that people do that on purpose, right? And we all kind of know when we've done it. We've pulled out. It's like, oh shoot, I didn't think he was coming that fast, or I pulled out. I'm like, where'd that come from? I didn't even notice them. And so the idea that we immediately go to jerk instead of whoopsie. Is what Hanlon's razor is about, is that there's not that much, again, we see enough evidence that we believe there's just malice everywhere. Yeah. But there just isn't, right? Most people are intending to do good things for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciated how you broke down being naive, being ignorant is different than stupid.
Right. But there are varieties of the same thing in the sense, right? Stupid is obvious. And I should have researched this. I don't know when Hanlon's razor was written, but it's not recent, right? It's an old not ancient times, right? But it's an old adage. But ignorant is I don't have the information I need, right? Naive is I don't have the context to put it to use. Right? And so there's a lot of different varieties of stupid in this context, right? So, ignorant. I didn't know that car was there when I pulled out, right? So I'm applying this to bosses, right? So that's where the premise goes. I hear complaints about bosses everywhere, right? Yeah. My boss is an idiot. My boss is mean. The CEO's just evil. We hear these, the executive team doesn't care about any of us. And I've met a couple executives that don't care, but most of them feel pain about what their employees go through in a very, very real level.
Yeah.
And there's so many reasons that they can't act they can't always relate to what people go through, right? Because most executives assume, this is the naiveness, assume that people are motivated by the same things they are.
Yeah.
Right. That's just one example of that. I'm a executive. I'm motivated by these things. Isn't everybody? And that's naive, right? Yeah. It's not mean. It's just naive. And so when they put an incentive system in place that or a vision in place or a challenge in place that people are like, why are you doing this to me? Were they being mean or were they being stupid? Right.
Yeah. And it's funny. I think before I had even heard the formal phrase or Hanlon's razor, my wife and I would have this expression we developed, kind of a different way of getting at the same thing, where if some company is mistreating you or there's bad service or something, or, meaningful or not in the grand scheme of things, we would say, are they screwing us or are they being idiots?
Yeah.
Different way. And exactly. Hanlon's razor would say they're more likely idiots or ignorant or clueless.
Or ignorant or naive or mistaken, right? To my favorite mistake is, I had good intentions, but whoopsie, right? And so, I think as an employee, right? And so this goes for respect for people. Respect for people is not just a downward facing maxim, right? It's not just, executives should have respect for people. It's everyone in the organization should have respect for people in all four directions: employees, peers, up, right, left and right.
Right.
Respect for people is either how we operate or how we don't. And so, downward facing respect for people is paramount, but it's not exclusive to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that gets complicated with power dynamics that are not equal forces in different directions. I mean, the thing you brought up about Hanlon's razor and assuming positive intent, like I get it in the context of Hanlon's razor. I've gotten in trouble with managers, leaders, previous, nothing I'm involved with now, where if I would express disagreement with a decision, so I'm like, okay, do I have the psychological safety to speak up, or I'm going to anyway? And I've had that phrase thrown back at me like, hey, don't get upset, assume positive intent. And I'm like, I don't give a bleep. I mean, I wouldn't say that at work. That's half a whiskey talking. A bad decision's a bad decision. I'm not interested in Hanlon's razor here.
Yeah.
I don't care the intent. I don't like the decision.
Right. And I think that's still very fair game. Right. And I think, so one of the uses of Hanlon's razor is, so I don't like the decision. What's the path forward? And the path forward, if I assume malice, is, to quit, to complain, to add a narrative, et cetera. But if I assume that it's like, no, that decision is based on misinformation, on lack of depth of thinking, well, now I have a different path. I can, it doesn't mean I'll be successful, but I can provide that context. I can give feedback. And, I can't tell you how many times I'll use this just around the lean journey, since this is lean whiskey. I'll talk with people and say the lean team, and they're like, oh, these executives or this executive doesn't get it. They're not doing X, Y, and Z. And then I'll go talk to that executive, and they're like, hey, I support lean, blah, blah. Yeah. Well, the people say, like, you're not doing X, Y, and Z. And they're like, I never knew that's what they expected of me. I never knew that's what they were looking for.
Disconnect. Yeah.
Just a disconnect. So they were naive. They couldn't read their minds. They weren't. This is why I recently wrote an article about how to be a good sponsor for Lean Mag, because we just assume that, oh, they're an executive, they know how to be a sponsor. Well, no, they don't, because nobody ever taught them how to be a sponsor, which again is ignorance, right? Yeah. No, they were never taught how to be a sponsor. So why should we just assume that they're capable of being a sponsor? So I think the two practical benefits of Hanlon's Razor: one, it's more emotionally, I'll say, fulfilling or less toxic emotionally, right? Like, oh, am I working for a mean boss or am I working for an imperfect boss? Right? It's one of those is a little less toxic. And then second, it gives us more degrees of freedom for action to assume stupidity than to assume malice.
Well, if there's ignorance, you can make your case or try to educate or inform.
Right. May not win
somebody about a perspective they might not have thought about, to be fair.
Right.
That phrase could have applied in the situation. But, I think the biggest issue I had was I felt like the whole assume positive intent was being thrown at me as a way to shut me down.
Yes. No, it shouldn't be. It's not a free pass, right? That's also important. That's why I think I kind of like the word stupid, because it's not a free pass to make bad decisions.
Right.
It's an explanation as to why bad decisions might happen most of the time.
And that's what it turned out to be here. But I mean, I don't think my life lesson is to think in a future situation to say, I disagree with that decision. That's really hard to hear. But per Hanlon's Razor, I don't think you're acting maliciously. I just think you're being stupid. No, that wouldn't have helped.
Probably not. But
I mean,
to your point around assume positive intent, that's not a free pass, right? I meant well, right? Yeah, but you really screwed me.
So it's like being authentic isn't hall pass to be a jerk,
right?
In the realm of psychological safety.
Yeah, like my wife, and this is a joke, and she's probably not going to listen to this, so it's okay. But she says, "Oh, I'm not mean. I'm just brutally honest." And it's a joke, right?
Radical candor.
Yeah, radical candor. So it's not permission for all of those things, and it's not a free pass for bad decisions.
Yeah,
but it's okay when I see a bad decision, when I see a bad action, what's the path forward? And when we assume maliciousness, it's a toxic spiral for a lot of people.
So we can apply Hanlon's Razor to topic number 3. I don't know if you're ready to move on, but it just occurred to me. Okay.
Let's move on. While I reach for my bottle and pour a little more.
So topic number 3. As I put into the Google Doc, and because this is lean whiskey, I'm going to say it this way, and it's okay. If you're listening with kids and a mild curse word is not acceptable, please hit pause. So what I put in the notes to Jamie was, do we want to discuss the labor notes bullshit here? And this is where I'd say this is not really a news publication. Labornotes.org is a labor publication. I would say this is an opinion piece.
Sure.
What was the headline? The headline was, it's about like the end of lean production. So don't let me forget Hanlon's Razor. Oh, which by the way, 1980. I thought it was older than that. 1980, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Not too far from you, right?
Nope, not too far from me.
Okay, so the headline is the end of lean production and what's ahead. And Labor Notes over time is just consistently critical of lean. I mean, they're a labor publication. They're very anti-management. And I think because lean seems to be management's idea. If management's evil, therefore lean is evil. Like they always refer to it as management by stress. And so and they're equating lean to just in time. So one of them must be reading the Wall Street Journal, right, where they have maybe a only partially correct understanding of lean. So they think, well, just in time's gone, so lean is gone, and I guess hooray. And then the other thing they say, which could be malice or stupidity, is they really go after Amazon and their distribution centers, and really attacking Amazon for quotas and speeding up work. I'm like, oh, I've never really heard anyone call Amazon lean in recent years. Like, so labor notes, they pop off. I shouldn't give them the attention, but are they acting out of malice or ignorance, Jamie?
Well, I think ignorance, and to be fair, I had this conversation about someone feeling bad about what lawyers said to them in court about them in court. It's like, well, lawyers have a job, and their job is to win the case.
Yeah.
And the labor notes editors have a campaign, and their job is to advance that campaign, right? Yeah. And so kudos to them. They're doing their job.
And I'm not opposed to the labor movement. I just want to put it out there that is not my issue.
No, I had, a UAW VP was a mentor of mine many years ago. So, I think again, it's one to assume that, well, if management's the enemy, then everything they say must be specifically a weapon, right? And if we understand motivations, it's like, well, is the primary goal of management to break a union or break labor for those that are not even organized, or is it to run a good business? And to be fair, I've met people who just make a sport out of messing with their union, and they, I think out of boredom, quite frankly. It was somebody I met that would it almost announce that they're going to get written up by the union because they
took some pride in that.
It took pride. How
many grievances I've got.
It was one of those where, going back to malice, it was like, I just want to screw with people today, and that was their intent. But it takes me back. It just reminds me of a story from almost 30 years ago. Well, 29 years ago. So I was in the Windsor assembly plant, and we were doing the first work of Chrysler operating system, and for those, so this is in Canada, and I don't know if this is still true, but at the time, the Canadian Auto Workers Union made the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, look like a church choir. They were way more aggressive and militant, by far. More
corrupt or just more militant?
No, not corrupt. Just very, very, very militant, very aggressive, very deterministic in a lot of ways. So I kind of respected them for the integrity of their efforts. But I had a shop steward, Terry, and I forget his last name. I wish I remembered his last name. Terry is his first name. But we're going off to do our very first work with about 120 people, 120 members, and on what we call a learning lab, or what a lot of people call a model area today.
Right.
And he, he pretty much like pops out of nowhere and stands right in front of me, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I hadn't met him yet. I hadn't even met him yet, which could be my mistake, but nevertheless. And we explained it, and he was very much putting us on notice that I'm watching you, right? But I was surprisingly not offended, and I think I had plenty of arrogance in the day, right? I still do, right? But for whatever it was, his intent seemed genuine. He seemed like he wasn't there just to mess with me. Seemed like he really cared about the people behind him. And I think that's probably what made me not, go off in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And so I made my best effort to engage Terry all along the way. And while we made about 900 improvements in several months, and massively improved the productivity of the area, but we also massively improved the safety and ergonomics of the area.
Yeah.
And we engaged all the employees while we did it. And this was a large factory. It's a 5,000 person factory. And Terry stood up in the union hall in support of what we were doing about 6 months later.
Yeah. Good.
And that, I give myself a little bit of credit because I didn't dismiss Terry as misintended right out of the gate.
Right.
I give Terry a lot of credit for being open-minded and paying attention and then judging what we were doing.
Sure.
So he started off assuming, misintent, bad intent,
Right.
without a doubt. But he kept his mind open to actually see what we were doing.
Yeah.
And it just, I carry that, I won't say that lesson, but at least that feeling I have for Terry with me 29 years later.
And, to labor notes or, the Minnesota Nurses Association, which has been militantly anti-lean in healthcare, to be fair to them, there are organizations that do ridiculous things in the name of lean.
Absolutely.
They're not focusing on safety. They're not engaging the workers. And, when I read their complaints about lean, I read them as complaints about bad management, which I'm on their side as wanting them to have better management. I want them to be able to focus on safety and quality and to be in a good work environment. I mean, what frustrates me is man, I feel like we should be on the same team here. All the things you say you want when, lean delivered well. Yeah. With a decent fidelity to Toyota and lean principles is a positive, but I think some people have already made up their minds, and it sounds like Terry didn't. So good for Terry.
Good for Terry. And tying this back to Hanlon's razor, of people that get lean wrong, and I'll be curious, I'll ask you the question and see what you think. What percentage of people get it wrong because they're using lean for another purpose, malice? And what percentage of them get it wrong because they're ill-informed and don't understand how to do it right?
Depends on where you draw the line. So when, to your point of they use lean for their old purpose. I mean, I think the problem is, and I've run across this a lot. There's, the cost cutters. Instead of SQDC, it's CCCC. C.
Right.
How many states? All C. And so when they get introduced to lean, they can't help but look at it as a new way to reduce cost.
Right.
So right there, if they never get beyond that, they're screwed. I've been brought in to visit organizations we've been doing lean for 2 years and nobody wants to participate. I mean, it doesn't take long to uncover that all you've been doing is mandating cost reduction projects. If you focused on safety, quality, delivery, cost would follow. If you engaged people, and I mean, it's not that complicated, but a lot of people make that mistake, maybe out of ignorance. I don't think it's malice. Is the cost only focus a little bit malicious, or is it ignorant? Do you blame? They're not stupid, but do they get some blame for not going to get better educated?
Yeah, I think so. And so it's a gray area. I think that's a good articulation of it. Because it's not one or the other. And malice is, if I'm too lazy or uncaring I'm going to go act to go accomplish a goal without even taking the time to understand the consequences, you can assign some malice to that.
Yeah.
Right? Not pure malice, not my intent is to screw you, right? But no, I'm after my goal. Don't even want to know what the consequences of meeting my goal are.
Right.
That's selfish, which is a lower form of malice, right? Yeah. So I think it is. There's a lot of gray space in between. It's a spectrum. So I think that's true. And what's the percentage? Totally unfair question.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's plenty of examples where things like selfish, rushed, even cowardice. I don't have the courage to face my own gaps of learning, ask questions and to go learn. And so I'm going to just put on an appearance of strength and knowledge and go act.
Yeah.
To me, that's cowardice. And cowardice is putting yourself ahead of others in many forms.
And it could be born out of insecurity.
Sure.
Not wanting to say, how many times I've heard people in hospital, oh yeah, we understand lean. We've been doing that for decades. We just don't call it lean. I'm like, nah, that's very likely untrue.
Yeah, right. It's because and some of that's I would rather choose the path, and this is where choose comes into intent. I'd rather choose the path of what I know than to be an ounce of curious about learning something. That's a choice, right? Mm-hmm. And so, is there malice in the world? Is there malice in management? Of course.
Yeah.
Right. But is there malice in labor notes? No, I think they have a job to do. They're trying to advance the labor cause. But would they rather slam lean because it's a management thing than be curious about how to do it well? Sure.
Yeah.
And there's again not there's a choice in there, right? There's a choice in there, and that's the concern.
I get why they would say why bother when it comes to learning about this thing that it's been demonstrated to them maybe to be bad, or they've decided it's bad. So we're all not curious about something. Like, I'm not curious about how the earth is actually flat, right? I'm just not. So wait, I'm gonna cut that clip at the beginning of you saying the earth is actually flat. Is that malice or stupidity on my part?
No, that's malice. Well, that's
I'm just joking.
That's that's having fun at my expense. So, but yeah. So, are they curious about it? Probably not. And there's some things we have to choose not to be curious about, but they are writing about it. And to me, that should be the threshold upon which you should get curious about it.
Yeah. All right. We're going to get curious about topic number 4.
Let's get curious about topic number 4. So, the Wall Street Journal, whether it's clickbait or they're just good at writing titles.
Yeah.
The jiggle is up. So this is their article, and it's the core of the article, right? So we all remember articles about how, as people started working from home, companies were monitoring things like mouse movement to see if you're actually active on your computer.
Right.
They don't know. If
that seems like the bare minimum.
It's the bare minimum. You're at your computer. You could be scrolling through Amazon for Amazon Day deals.
Because if that's all your job is, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a Simpsons moment where Mr. Burns refers to Homer Simpson as one of the chair moisteners in Sector 7G.
Yep. Sometimes that's all it is.
But how sad if there's no root cause analysis of why someone is not working.
No, and
by these companies, right?
Well, right. So, a lot of it is like, well, does problem solving begin after there's a problem or before, right? And so, what we did know is that they had indicators to go well, we want to know if people are working because we don't know if there's a problem or not. At least I could walk past their desk before. How do I know? We need an answer. Let's come up. Somebody sold them an answer, which was we can monitor whether their mouse is still moving.
Yeah.
And so people were actually either building or buying, because people actually made these tools that jiggled your mouse.
It's this arms race of surveillance tools and anti-surveillance tools. Imagine if that creativity was applied to things that were better for the economy.
Right.
Really creating value somewhere.
We tend to find ways to be creative in somewhat unproductive ways, which is fine. We all need a distraction. But so now it's so the subtitle of this article is "Bosses Bust Workers Who Fake Computer Activity,"
and they're framing it as the worker problem. Like, this is a leadership problem.
It's both, right? So well, let's throw malintent out the window. But if you've put time into making sure your mouse moves in order not to get in trouble, you're part of the problem. Let's,
because there's one level of, is there a lack of psychological safety to speak up and say, I don't have enough work right now, because they think they're going to get fired?
Oh, there's probably a whole bunch of things, right? So I'm not saying, I'm not saying and psychological safety, as you know, is a spectrum. There's degrees of that, but the amount of thought people put into avoiding the conversation is greater than the thought that they've probably put in having the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So just the fact that this exists is a concern. So to me, fraud is fraud. Let's just put it that way, right? Like if you're actually trying to, if you put it this, let me use an example. People used to clock hours, right? And clock your hours, clock in, clock out. And if you're trying to fake your hours, like it's just fraud. Like there may be 10 reasons why it exists, but it doesn't change the fact that you participated in that in a bad intended action. So I don't think it gives permission for people to do the bad thing, but the root cause, to your point, is all those other things, right?
Yeah.
Bad culture, bad assignments, bad metrics.
Yeah. There's that, there's the question of ethics. We also seen in recent years, people at tech companies who supposedly have 2 full-time remote work from home jobs at once. I think that's fair to say that's unethical.
Yes.
You could get away with it for a while, but unethical. I don't think it's unethical. You hear stories of, Facebook and Meta, companies that were hiring tons of people, and people got hired and were literally assigned no work to do for 6 months or a year. I don't think that's unethical to collect a paycheck for doing nothing.
No,
it might suck. It's
bad.
Yeah.
But no, I think, I think going just because I can, I'm going to go do another job. I'm going to day trade while I'm in meetings with other people.
Yeah.
So consciously distorting the system for your own gain. There's an ethical gap there. But root cause, right? It comes down to the fact that, we have cultural problems, we have work problems, and we have metrics problems, right? And to a large degree, when we don't know how to measure work, we don't know how to measure accomplishment,
value. Not just activity, but value.
Not just activity, 100%, right?
Yeah.
Value. And that's what I mean by work, right? That's producing output.
Yeah.
Whatever output is, whether it's ideas or articles or calls or whatever it is, producing output, accomplishments. If we don't know how to measure that, we measure what's easy.
Right.
And the old metric was hours, right? Just FaceTime, we used to call it, right? FaceTime for salary folks, right? Because
presenteeism is another phrase.
Yes. So, people always go am I visible? People go to meetings just to make sure they were seen. And they still do. I see plenty of that going on. I want to be in meetings because it looks like I'm busy. If people see me in a whole bunch of meetings, it looks like I'm everywhere. I'm super productive.
Yeah.
And so FaceTime was not replaced by, but was substituted for things like, keeping your mouse busy, because they were poor metrics of actual contributions.
Yeah. Cool. So there, I don't want to pick on Wells Fargo.
Well, as a customer, I can say, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, involuntarily a mortgage customer, and in this day, and I'm not going to voluntarily refinance just to switch who holds our mortgage. But in the category of The Simpsons predicts everything, there's probably a different episode where Homer was working from home in his nuclear plant job, and they set up a computer terminal, and all he was doing was something looking at some sort of prompts on the computer, and he was just having to type yes, enter, yes, enter. And then he was really proud of himself. He somehow stumbled across, all you have to do is hit Y. So like, oh, okay, Kaizen, productivity. And then he somehow discovered, like, they had one of those birds,
The water
with the water in
based
the
bird.
base, and it bobs up and down. And
Yep.
so he set that thing up to just go forward and hit Y. And like, there was a near meltdown because Homer was shirking his duties in his work from home state. But it's always The Simpsons. But, the pick on Wells Fargo, though, like when I think of fraud, Wells Fargo is maybe one of the first companies that come to mind. It said in the article, the bank had fired more than a dozen employees in its wealth and investment unit for allegedly simulating keyboard activity to create the impression of active work. So there they go, blaming the employees. This is the same company that years ago fired thousands of bank tellers and employees for unethically creating all of these accounts that customers didn't want. And like, it was the company culture and incentive structures that were forcing people to try to come up with 8 financial vehicles for each customer. And they, so they, like, if you hired thousands of unethical tellers, why would I trust my money with you if you don't know how to hire people? Like, sorry, shame on us. We hired all these bank robbers.
And I think there's some statistics to kind of go, if and it's not that if there's more than one, but if it's a small number, it's them, right? There's bad intended people out there. Mm-hmm. What's the first assumption? But if it's hundreds or thousands, you kind of have to go system error, right? What's going on here systematically that's leading to this, and sometimes and sometimes you do have to fire people even when you've created the conditions, right? So if you have a bad system that hires somebody for a critical job that they're not capable of, they don't get to keep doing it just because you hired them, right? So
there's also look at the system, I would say.
But then you look at, how did we let that happen? We were accountable, and that's it's often when I work one-on-one with leaders and they are worried about having to deal with I'll call it a problem employee, but it's a problem where the problem they absolutely contributed to.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we have to fix this, and we acknowledge our contribution to causing it. So we're in it together. We're in it together. But I can't fix our part if you don't also fix yours. And so, to me, I'll say the jiggle is up, right?
Right.
It's like, well, shouldn't you at the same time come up with better ways to measure and evaluate whether people are doing their work?
Yes.
Right.
And are they creating value? Yeah. Yeah. So I thought some things were moving in the right direction, where some companies were, focused on, was it Best Buy for a while was trendy, results-oriented workplace.
Yeah.
Like, you don't care how many hours you work, get your job done.
Get your job done. I'll say a friend of mine, ex-client of mine, who, they actually have a team in Germany and a team in Japan, and they live in the Eastern United States. And it's like, how do you manage that? And he's like, I get up really early and work my team in Germany. Then I go play golf in the afternoon. Then I work my team in Japan.
Yeah.
Like, he's absolutely doing a good job. Just that's the system that works for him.
Yeah.
So, as we start to think about these these challenges. It reminds me of, I've worked with numerous people, and I'm guilty of this too, by the way.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't say counting, I never counted, but like looking at the cars in the parking lot and using that, at a certain time in the morning and a certain time in the afternoon. It's like, 8:00, the parking lot's not full. Where is everybody?
Yeah.
4:30, the parking lot's not full. Why? Where did everybody go? And so my car was in the parking lot at 6 a.m. and it left at 7 p.m. Great. That's a me problem. And somebody said to me very clearly, it's like, how do you measure the people that went home for dinner and then opened their laptop and did emails for 3 more hours?
Yeah. Right.
That's not a car in the parking lot. Right.
Right.
And so this is the key that we really have to understand, are the things we're looking at to evaluate the right indicators?
Yeah.
Are they genuine indicators of what we actually care about?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to quote, maybe, I don't know if this wraps up the discussion here. There was a woman quoted in the article who's like a influencer and consultant or coach. She said, ultimately, she advises workers to ask themselves why they would need to use a mouse jiggler in the first place. Often it's a sign they're in a workplace that values busyness over actual output. And then here's her quote. She says, I would beg to question if that's a good working environment to begin with. That's like a mic drop quote right there. And I think KaiNexus would never pull that kind of surveillance like that on people, because there's a good culture and there's a connection to mission and purpose. And does everybody hired at the company work out? Well, no, some people leave, some people get managed out. So it's not Shangri-La, but like when you have good culture, or, Dr. Deming would say substitute leadership, you don't need this surveillance arms race.
Yeah, exactly. And so do better. How about that, right? Do better. Be curious. What matters? How do I evaluate it? I may not always be able to measure it, but how do I evaluate it? And be curious about what matters, not just what's easy to measure.
Yeah. Well, cool.
All right. Well, we've covered a bunch of topics. And we even tied them together, not always with a plan. So that's...
I didn't realize how some of that was... how some of that came together. Yeah.
It worked out.
Yeah.
All right. So before we wrap up, I don't know where it is, how it is where you are, but here it's 95 with a heat index of 104.
It was like 92 and humid in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky today.
Okay. Bad, but not quite as bad, but yes.
Right.
I got out of the car. As I mentioned, I drove my wife and daughter to the airport, and I just walked from my car to the house, and my glasses were just completely fogged over.
Yeah.
Humidity. It took about half a second.
I can relate.
Yeah. So you and I are big whiskey fans, but other than whiskey, on a hot day, what's a cocktail or a drink that you enjoy?
That's an easy answer. And this has become very trendy in Texas. I don't know how much it has spread, but I think pretty much anywhere in Texas now, if you were to order a ranch water, the bartender would know what you mean. It's the skinniest of skinny margaritas. It is tequila, lime juice, and sparkling water, preferably Topo Chico, Mexican sparkling mineral water, which is incredibly fizzy. So it's basically a margarita with no sweetener. And you get the fizzy. It's just a cold, easy drinking, hot weather drink. So you go other places, like any bartender can make it, but then you're kind of having to talk them through the recipe. It's not malice on their part; they're just ignorant of the ranch water.
Yeah. No, and I always get concerned when I have to talk a bartender through the recipe.
Have you ever had a ranch water?
I have not. Now I generally avoid tequila as much as I avoid vodka and most other. Yeah, I'm pretty much whiskey or wine is about my lane. But I'd give that a shot. I'm actually about ready to give an Aperol Spritz a shot.
Yeah, I think I've had a sip of one of those. I think my wife ordered.
Yeah, I saw something. I have no idea if it's true. It was like the #1 cocktail in America.
It was very, very trendy, or maybe it still is. But I mean, I like Aperol. I like sparkling wine. I mean,
despite pouring some into cocktails, I've never had Aperol by itself, so I'll have to maybe give an Aperol spritz a try. But yeah, so for me, my favorite, although I couldn't do it every day, and I can't do two, but I always have a bottle of limoncello in the freezer.
Oh, yeah,
and it's just like a lemony dessert wine, right?
Yes.
And if it comes out of the freezer, I don't even need a chilled glass. I just pour it into a glass, and just sip on it. And it's just like cold dessert. And I'm not a dessert guy, right? So it's like I'm not eating this with ice cream. But if somebody said, "Oh, you eat your ice cream? I'll have a limoncello."
Yeah.
And so I might have one once every other week. I don't do it very often, and I'm actually out. And I need to understand it's a shortage, because I was actually at the state store picking up 4 Walls, and they're like, I actually asked the manager, I'm like, I don't see any limoncello. They're like, we haven't been able to get any. So, boy, I hope there's not a shortage.
I mean, you could look into, you can make limoncello at home.
Sure. As a guy that goes down rabbit holes, that's a dangerous path for me. So, but we might be headed there. I
didn't bring that up out of malice, but
no, that's but now I know what I'm Googling as soon as we're done.
Yeah.
So,
because all you need is vodka and sugar and lemon peels and I mean, not that I've made it, but I will admit to having.
I used to make my own whiskey cream / Bailey's. So I think you just you planted a seed that's probably not going to go away.
Maybe that's a future episode.
That's a future episode.
If I could make my own chartreuse, which there is a shortage of in many parts of the country, I can get it here in Kentucky, and it's impossible to find in Texas. I would do what those monks in France do, but it's a secret recipe. And good luck making your own with 40 or 100 herbs or whatever the heck is in it.
It's like Drambuie. Drambuie is made from honey, from heather that is carried. I forget if they carry the bees up to the heather fields or they carry the heather to the bees, but either way, there's like a big. It's like this area and these bees and this heather, and you can't replicate making your own Drambuie. So some things we're just going to have to buy and call it a day. But I may be making limoncello now that you've planted that seed.
If you're going to do it, maybe we both do it. And we can talk about it one episode.
Maybe.
All right. On lemon and honey, and you make me think of a penicillin cocktail. Is that
penicillin, it's a new cocktail I've added to my repertoire because I use fresh ginger for making ginger tea, and to put with some of my fish. Put some in my soy sauce and put it over some tuna steak or something like that. But you mull some ginger, put it with some either honey or I still use maple syrup. Simple syrup, some lemon juice, some blended whiskey, which I use Monkey Shoulder for because it's cheap and easy. Right. And then you put a smoky, peaty scotch on top, which I often use Ardbeg for. And another refreshing drink but a whiskey drink, right? But another refreshing drink that I probably can't do 2 in a row of. But not that it's heavy. It's just like, okay, I've had my penicillin.
Yeah.
Ready for something else.
No, I probably would never want a second limoncello. I don't think I would. Like Negroni is a drink. I love a Negroni. I never want a second one. It's an aperitif. You move on.
Yep. So, but I think that's great because it's like, ooh, that hit the spot. I'm done with it. That's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank goodness for variety.
Yep. And variety, new whiskeys. tonight.
And new whiskeys. We both tried new whiskeys, and like I said, still not. It's grown on me, but I'd still say it's not bad.
Not bad. Does that mean 3 stars out of 5?
Yeah, I think that's fair. 3 stars out of 5. I'm okay with that.
Didn't pour it out
for $32.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, it's fun as always. We'll figure out when we can do episode 48.
Yes.
Another summer episode, maybe.
Plan a path to 50. So, or just 50 comes when after 49, and we enjoy the moment. So,
yeah.
To try new things, to try new formats, to try new whiskeys, to old friends. Cheers.
Cheers. This is where I make the cup. There we go.
Much better.
Against the coffee mug, second time's the charm.